Hi, everyone. We're going to kick off the session now. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, depending where you're connecting from. We are very glad you could join us today for this session titled Best Practice in Child Labor Identification and Remediation Beyond Factory Walls, hosted by GoodWeave International. I'm Silvia Mera, one of the presenters today. I am the director for the apparel program at GoodWeave, where I lead our work in apparel supply chains in India and Bangladesh. And I'm going to present the other two speakers for the day. We have Vinti Singal, who's joining from New Delhi, India. Vinti is heading GoodWeave's apparel and accessories program in India. And we also have Elisabeth Bystrom, who is connecting from California, and Elisabeth is our director for capacity building. Elisabeth in particular is leading the work to implement the GoodWeave system to ending exploitative labor in supply chains beyond the carpet sector, which is exactly what the session will be focusing on today. We also have our colleague Madison Mellish, Program Officer for Capacity Building, who is going to support the session from behind the scenes today. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. We, of course, encourage you to ask questions. We're going to do a lot of talking, but we definitely want to hear you and dedicate time to answer your questions. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to us today by typing them in the questions panel of the control panel. So if you're not familiar with this webinar platform, you may take a second to locate where these are. You may send your questions at any time during the presentation. We will be pausing and collecting and addressing the questions during two moments. There's gonna be a time halfway through the session. We're gonna pause and take about 5–10 minutes to answer questions then. And then we can also answer questions at the end of the session. You can write in the chat and your question will show to everyone. If you'd like to keep your question anonymous, you can also send it privately through the chat function to our colleague Madison. You can go to and then you can select from the drop-down menu Madison's name, and she will be receiving your question and can ask the question on your behalf. Please note the session today is being recorded. We will also be asking you to answer a few questions throughout the presentation using a polling tool called Poll Everywhere. So when the question comes up, you will be able to use the URL on the screen or text a phone number that will appear on the screen to access the poll and submit your answers. We will also be posting a link in the chat box for you to refer to. We will be, in fact, starting the session today with a poll. So in the next slide, you can see that we have a question for you. We are going to focus today for the next 75 minutes on child labor and deep supply chain due diligence. We would like to know from you what piqued your interest in the session today. In other words, why are you interested in these topics specifically? So you can take a moment, and my colleague Madison just posted the link in the chat, or you can just type in any browser pollev.com/GoodWeave, and you should be able to quickly access the poll window where you can enter your answer to the question, what piqued your interest in the session today. I'm going to wait for a minute or so to give you the time to connect and submit your questions. So we got two questions coming. One is the focus behind the factory walls, which is in fact something that we know companies are very interested in, especially as this is something different from the traditional tier 1 audits. Then we have how to remediate child labor in supply chains. And more people are supporting these two entries. We're gonna wait an additional 20 seconds or so. Please feel free to submit your answers. We're very curious to hear from you why you're dedicating time to us today. Best practice examples, mitigating risks, due diligence assessment of deeper supply chains, how to trace, how to identify child labor apart from usual traditional ways. These are all great. Let's wait 10 more seconds. I see more coming, and we're gonna see them at the bottom of the slide. Of course, very relevant. How has COVID impacted these two topics, right? We're gonna see in a second that these have been made even more relevant because of the impact of COVID. Yeah. Okay. All right. We can pause there. Thanks so much for submitting the answers. It's really interesting for us, of course, to understand why these topics specifically are relevant for you and you want to hear more about them. Clearly, there are a number of reasons why we all think that deep supply chain due diligence and child labor are priority topics. I want to share a couple of additional points to highlight why we're talking about this today. So the first one, which is sort of linked to what some of you have said, the focus on the beyond factory walls, right? That part of the title of our presentation is really linked to the fact that we know that companies often do have compliance frameworks in place. They do have audit frameworks established, but these often do not cover the full extent of the supply chains. And GoodWeave has over 2 decades of experience working in the informal sector, and we know that this is where the most exploitations, including child labor, occur. Secondly, there is, as many of you probably know, mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence legislation in the pipeline. It's been discussed at the EU level, and COVID-19 has actually accelerated these conversations. This legislation basically means that voluntary measures that have been proposed to businesses so far have failed to achieve their purpose. And so new mandatory measures would be introduced. And if passed, this legislation will apply to businesses and hold them accountable for the advancement and the protection of workers' rights, including elimination of child labor. So we see some momentum from a legislation point of view. And thirdly, as some of you mentioned, COVID-19 has definitely made the vulnerable even more vulnerable. So we're already working in a very vulnerable part of the supply chains, as I mentioned. Now in the post-pandemic world, or rather in the pandemic world, the pandemic is definitely not over. We know that workers have been impacted and informal workers have especially been impacted. In fact, a survey conducted in India and Nepal by GoodWeave International has highlighted that since the pandemic began, 60% of the workers we interviewed have either lost their job entirely or seen their income decrease. as an example. And we know that apparel workers have been affected even more severely than workers in other sectors such as carpets or home textiles. Another very worrying trend is that schools have been closed worldwide, but in countries like India, where we focus a lot of our work, this means for children in worker communities that they will unlikely go back to school. So 0% of the children we surveyed are going to school right now because schools are closed, but then their parents are unsure. They can send the children back to school when these reopen, because in the meantime, their financial situation has become so difficult that they may not have the means to send the children back to school. And the same survey has highlighted other very concerning trends, including debt that workers have with their in the community, and the fact that women have been impacted more than men. So all of this really points us to paying even more attention to these topics because of COVID-19, of the COVID-19 pandemic. So in today's session, we are gonna walk you through the key components of GoodWeave methodology. This methodology detects, remediates, and prevents child labor in supply chains. And the session today will focus on how we train companies, so on the components of this methodology that we can provide companies and organizations with, so that they can apply these practices in their own supply chains. So the session will last about 75 minutes. We will stop about the half point, as I said, to answer questions, as well as at the end. We will cover the GoodWeave methodology, which is comprised of 5 key points: effective standard setting, deep supply chain mapping, inspection and monitoring, remediation and prevention. And we're going to also look at the application of some of these best practices in areas where GoodWeave is working. After the session, the attendees will have an understanding of why standards are important for protecting children and eliminating child labor, how deep supply chain mapping is important for the identification of child labor. They will learn some of the best practices, as I said, for conducting inspections at various levels of the supply chains. We will also talk about remediation, and also we're going to focus on the role that social programs have in preventing child labor, as we also focus on preventing and addressing root causes and not just addressing immediate risks. For those of you who are not familiar with GoodWeave International, as a quick background, our mission is to stop child labor in global supply chains permanently. We were founded in 1994 by Nobel laureate Kailash Satyarthi, and since then we've becoming the leading global institution working to end child labor in global supply chains through a market-based system and holistic approach. We have pioneered a system of programs to combat and eradicate child force and bonded labor in supply chains. When we say market-based, it's because the system really harnesses market powers through its work with brands and producers. And through this work, we drive full supply chain transparency and focus on hidden supply chains. At the heart of what we do, there is the GoodWeave standard, and we're going to cover the standard as part of the components we're going to talk about today. The standard, the GoodWeave standard, is really the assurance on behalf of importers and manufacturers that goods they make and sell have been produced without child force and bonded labor. And complying with these standards requires complete supply chain transparency verified by regular unannounced inspections of all production facilities. So when we talk about beyond factory walls, is because we don't stop at tier 1, but we go all the way down to home-based workers. GoodWeave also certifies products, and so adherence to the standard for products that can be certified is reflected by the appearance of the GoodWeave label. GoodWeave is not just a certification system, though. The standard is really our tool to provide visibility into supply chains. And if victims of child and forced labor are identified, we have a very strong focus as an organization on remediation, restoring childhoods, and helping children access education. We do what we do because there is still a lot to be done to address child labor worldwide. As you are likely all well aware, child labor is still a huge issue worldwide. As you can see from the statistics shown here on the screen, we have 12.6 million child laborers in India, 1.6 million in Nepal, 1.2 million in Bangladesh. These are all countries where we work. And at the end of the day, GoodWeave has realized that standard corporate auditing simply does not reach the hidden levels of the supply chains. So this is where we come in with our approach, and this is where we think we can really make a difference. What is so unique about what we do? Our proven approach is comprised of 5 different pillars that work together holistically to achieve deep supply chain due diligence that stops child force and bonded labor. So first, we harness market power over production chains. What we do, we partner with retailers and importers. So usually the work that we do starts with the partnership with a brand or a retailer. By bringing together the power of consumers and businesses, we can start the engine for social change. So in carpets and home textiles, we distinguish them with our GoodWeave label. And in apparel, we are working with apparel brands to provide deep supply chain due diligence that reaches the bottom of their supply chains. This is a relationship that we have been nurturing with several brands for a long time. And this really changes behavior and practices. Through working with us, we really can make no child labor a market requirement for these importers, producers, along with design, price, and other features. What we do with brands and then through their producers is cleaning up supply chains. And this is done by independently monitoring against the standard, including all tiers of production, from factory to village to home, and remediate cases of child labor that we identify during these activities. We verify compliance to our rigorous standards, and we map and inspect, as I mentioned, factories, work sites, facilities, all the way down to individual homes. The inspections are random, unannounced, and frequent. So this is another thing that is usually different from the standard announced audit that cannot really detect issues such as child labor. This practice leads us to children that are hidden and also serve as a powerful deterrent to bad labor practices that lead to children being employed in the first place. GoodWeave also offers educational opportunities to former child workers and those at risk of entering work. Our social programs serve victims, address the root causes of child labor, and often both. Then we improve working conditions of all workers. We do this by addressing a broad set of workers' rights concerns throughout the supply chain. And we offer things like skills training and other improvement programs to adult workers. So we focus on children, but we also focus on adult workers. As we understand that ensuring adult workers are better compensated and fairly treated in their workplace is an important component of eradicating child labor. We promote best practices by raising the bar for other supply chain programs and bringing about thought leadership. So as I mentioned, we have been working in this space for 25 plus years, and this really has led us to pioneer and refine a holistic system that we are now rolling out in other product categories. And also we are working to transfer best practices to other organizations, and this session today is very much part of that. I touched briefly on the GoodWeave label. For those of you who are familiar with this label, we provide this to certified carpets and home textiles that, as I said, are in compliance with our standard. This label really helps making consumers increasingly aware of the need for ethically produced products. And it has for several years helped us build trust and appeal to a growing group of socially responsible consumers. And what the GoodWeave label really is a result of a process aimed at minimizing child labor risk in supply chains, and something that our partners in the carpet and home textiles really have close to their heart. So what began as a grassroots effort in India, today is a global organization. Today is GoodWeave International. We work in a number of locally led and registered affiliate offices. We are present in South Asia, North America, as well as Europe. We work on the carpets, home textiles, and apparel sectors in India, carpets and home textiles and bricks in Nepal, carpets in Afghanistan, and we recently launched our apparel work in Bangladesh too. And we're also members of a number of multi-stakeholder initiatives, of course, the German Partnership for Sustainable Textiles, and which is hosting us today, as well as the Ethical Trading Initiative, the Dutch Covenant, and many others. In terms of impact, when we talk about this holistic system really making a difference, so far, through this holistic system, we have engaged over 180 brands, including large multinational companies and smaller enterprises, which I think is important, as I often hear from smaller medium enterprises that a lot of the programs out there are really targeted for big corporations, whilst we have a solution for really companies of any size. Some of the companies we work with are Target, Monsoon, VF Corporation, Gap, and there is a list on our website if you are interested in seeing our partners. We inspected production at all levels of the supply chains through over 14,000 audits just in 2019. Just in India, we have a very large team that conducts these inspections. We are very proud to say that we have rescued over 7,600 children from labor, and we have supported over 19,200 with access to education programs, and this only in 2020. Our model has definitely contributed to the reduction of child labor, and as I mentioned, for the first several years has been focused on the carpet sector. So now we have expanded to new sectors to replicate this successful approach. I'm going to pause here with this introduction, and I will let my colleague Elisabeth talk about the various components of the holistic system that we're going to focus on for the rest of this session. Elisabeth, over to you.
Thanks, Silvia. Over the last few years, GoodWeave has been codifying our way of working into an interrelated set of training modules. This has helped us share our system with other organizations like yours that may be interested in applying best practices from our methodology and experiences in child labor prevention and remediation into their own organizations and supply chains. The diagram you see on the screen shows the modules that make up the training, starting with effective standard setting at the top and moving to the right to deep supply chain mapping, then focused inspection and monitoring, child labor remediation, and finally preventative measures against child labor. Together, all parts make up a strong and holistic approach to identification and remediation of child labor and supply chains beyond just the Tier 1 factories and throughout all parts of the supply chain. In the next slide, we'll see the first module in the series is how to strengthen standards to address child labor. This training is designed to provide participants with an understanding of the role voluntary sustainable standards and social compliance codes play in the protection of children and elimination of child labor. You'll learn how to develop or strengthen your own standards and codes and draft and implement appropriate and effective requirements for different tiers of production, including for subcontractors and home-based workers, to effectively combat child labor through your own supply chains. You'll also learn the importance of including actionable clauses on remediation and how to foster improvement through progressive requirements. For example, in our own system, at the heart of what we do is the GoodWeave International Generic Standard, which provides an assurance on behalf of all importers and manufacturers that the goods they make and sell are verified to be free from child, forced, and bonded labor. The standard addresses the conditions under which a product is made throughout the entire supply chain. Complying with the standard requires complete supply chain transparency, verified by regular and frequent unannounced inspections of all production facilities involved in making the product. The onus for compliance at all levels rests with the exporter. Our standard contains core principles and requirements that must be fulfilled for certification, but it also includes progress criteria in the standard to gauge continuous improvement over time. In this training module around effective standard setting, we talk about what key components should be included in strong standards to prevent child labor in supply chains. These are guided by international norms and standards and provide us with the framework against which we can verify compliance during inspections. As we've said, a fundamental feature of the GoodWeave standard is the chain of responsibility over supply chain compliance. While it's essential that the brand initiate the demand for a GoodWeave compliant supply chain, the responsibility for compliance with the standard lies with the licensed exporters or suppliers and their subcontractors. It's the licensee's responsibility that all factories, contractors, and subcontractors are compliant throughout the entire supply chain. In the standard, the different criteria that must be complied with are clearly spelled out for the various supply chain actors, as you'll see on the next slide. Here on the screen is an example to show you how we do this in practice. We have the standard requirement shown at the top of the screen that children below the age of 14 shall not be employed or engaged in labor. How do we ensure this throughout the entire supply chain? Well, you can see that at the exporter level, it's explicitly required to have a written policy. Similarly, a no child labor policy is required at all subcontracted units. Just to note that these are not the full requirement. This is only an example of how they differ. At the home-based worker units, however, we're not looking for a paper policy. Rather, we want to know that workers understand the legal age limits and are able to explain to the inspectors that child labor is not allowed. Understanding in these units is also confirmed through surprise inspections when no underage children are found working. Now, let's just pause here for a moment, and we'd like to know a little bit more about your supply chains in our next poll and the breadth of your code standards and monitoring systems. So you'll go to the same poll EV/GoodWeave, and you'll see that there's questions on the screen. Do you monitor production? Rather, do you monitor compliance from exporters or tier 1 suppliers? Does your monitoring system include subcontractors, or maybe you're able to monitor all the way down to your home-based production units? We'll give you a few minutes. So you go back to that polling page and check. You can check one of the 4 options, obviously none of the above, in case that doesn't apply to you at all. We know that not everybody is a standard setting or a system that does function with monitoring. So great, we're seeing few answers coming in. Exporters and their subcontractors. We'll give you a few more minutes. I hope you all can find the poll. If you have any questions, you can put a question or a comment in the text or the chat to Madison so she can help you find it. You can also use your phone. All right, I think we'll go on. We see that here the majority of people monitor down to the exporter tier or as far as, and some of you look to your exporters and your subcontractors. Thank you for participating and playing our polls. In GoodWeave's experience, we've learned that in order to really know what's going on in supply chain, the whole system has to be designed to allow that. The standard or code has to address all production levels, and compliance has to be monitored, not just at the end of the supply chain, but throughout to really detect that child labor. So in the next slide, we'll go on to the next set of training modules. In this one, GoodWeave offers, the next training module GoodWeave offers is on deep supply chain mapping. So that's related to how your standard can effectively look at a problem, but also how far down you can see into your supply chain. This training provides you with the knowledge and skills to be able to conduct deep supply chain mapping of your own production that will reach from the factory level to the very end of your supply chain, where generally undisclosed production takes place. You'll understand the key components that need to be in place for an effective mapping process that will facilitate the identification of child labor where it may be occurring. You'll be given the opportunity to practice conversations at different levels of the supply chain with all types of production units. This will allow you to build a foundation of trust to be able to gain access and verify whether or not child labor is occurring. Next slide. Thank you. Why is this so important? On the screen, we have a very simplistic version of how a typical production supply chain looks. For GoodWeave, this could be carpets, home textiles, or apparel. I'm sure you're familiar with the way this looks, but we put it in this simplistic graphic to give you an idea of what the hidden supply chain looks like. At the top, you have the brand who places the order with the exporters. Those several exporters, who could be either manufacturers themselves or clearinghouses, in turn may contract production to multiple subcontractors. As you know, those subcontractors may not be able to fulfill the order entirely themselves. There might be specific processes such as beading or embroidery that need to be outsourced, or they may not have the capacity to complete the order and may subcontract out for surge capacity. Then you get to a scenario where there may be dozens to hundreds of undisclosed supply chains, including home-based units, that the brand is not aware of even exist in their supply chains. Of course, for the links between the different levels of the supply chain, they may vary. For example, an exporter may be sourcing directly from a home-based worker without the involvement of a subcontractor. At the same time, the same home-based worker may also be working with a number of subcontractors on different orders, or one subcontractor may be linked to a number of exporters and place orders to various home-based workers. For this reason, it's critical to have a process where the entire full supply chain is disclosed and mapped, to then be inspected during subsequent unannounced visit. In this training module, we teach participants how to do this because we know how difficult and important it is to uncover this kind of hidden child labor if it's occurring in a supply chain. This is the hidden level where it is often found. Now my colleague Vinti will illustrate how important this mapping process is through an example that took place in one of our own supply chains. Vinti?
Thank you, Elisabeth. So one of our examples, and this is probably very common, and we probably hear this almost every day when our inspections are happening. So this is the case story where our monitoring team was inspecting an exporter factory for a partner brand. We were provided with a few order details, including an order for 3,000 pieces of a black dress. The factory is a well-known garment exporter with multiple units. 3 units were approved for production for this brand, and this factory was audited by a partner brand over a year ago. Despite producing for many known brands and undergoing multiple social and quality audits, when our inspection team requested to map the manufacturing of this dress, the management informed us that no audit they had undergone required them to provide a map of the production process. GoodWeave's monitoring team began looking into the movement of raw materials and how the fabric passed through various departments, from cutting to sewing to washing to finishing and packing. The team found that order processing information was missing for this black dress. During the factory tour, the team saw a mini truck being loaded with black fabric. Upon interviewing the driver and correlating a goods movement receipt, they found that this fabric was being sent to another factory for cutting and stitching. This fabric was for the same black dress our team was mapping. This other factory was not an approved unit for the brand, but we found that it was being used to process orders for the brand. The factory management was very resistant and did not allow our inspectors to visit the other factory, nor did they provide any further details related to production. This illustrates a common experience for our inspections team. When they focus on the audit trail, they find outsourcing almost every time, whether it is to the other units of the supplier group or to subcontracted production units. It is important to note that depending on capacity needs and price advantage, suppliers almost always use outsourced production. GoodWeave's inspections focuses on identifying these hidden supply chain layers and working with producers to improve these conditions in the hidden units. We'll now take a pause for question and answers. Silvia, over to you.
Thanks, Vinti. Do we have any questions so far? And I know Madison is going to help us go through the questions that have been submitted so far, both in the public chat and to her privately.
Silvia, so there's one question that's come in so far. It was around some of the data at the beginning of your presentation, which was, is the child labor data that was presented, did it include all sectors or just the textile sector alone?
Yes, yeah. We have data for child labor in the country. It's quite difficult because, especially at the informal level, to understand the magnitude of the child labor phenomenon. This is also why work such as the one that GoodWeave does is so important. But there are a number of studies that have been done in recent times that focus specifically on, for example, the embroidered garment sector in India. And in that sector, at the home-based level, child labor has been found to be prevalent, and sometimes even from children as young as 5, which is an extreme example, but in many cases also for children as young as 5, they were working alongside their parents. So it is hard to come up with a specific percentage, but it's definitely a very widespread phenomenon. Especially in the embroidered and informal tiers in India and in the countries where we work.
Thanks, Silvia. Another question just came in. It says, how can we identify hidden parts in our supply chains?
Vinti, would you like to take that question from a, I would say, technical perspective?
Sure. I think one of the key elements is really understanding what your supply chains really look like. We say hidden supply chains, and the reason we say hidden is because, producers, brands sometimes really don't know where production is really happening. So there is a lot of investment that needs to happen in terms of understanding where products are being made. Once you know what units are being engaged, whether it's an exporter, and then are there subcontracted units that are being used beyond the exporter or home-based sites. Once you have visibility to those supply chains, it's only then that you can start, understanding what are the key issues and really trying to make, differences and trying to make, corrective actions, and then obviously set up systems to ensure that, issues are prevented from happening again and again. So, one of the key things is definitely having visibility, and that can really happen by understanding, what your supply chain looks like. It's a long-term, work. It won't really happen, within a short period of time. But I think it's absolutely worth it. When you really start seeing those issues, you try and understand that while, probably the audit report says, a green rating for exporters, but real supply chains may have issues, and it gives an opportunity to really find those issues and remediate them.
Thanks, Vinti. And then one last question, which is perhaps a good transition to where we're going next. Someone asked, is it possible to check and control child workers?
When we identify, and I think Vinti will come in after I provide an initial response to these questions in terms of how we monitor, right, the children that we identify. During our inspections, if we identify or suspect a case of child labor, we would then start collecting information on this specific case. And as I mentioned, remediation is a very important part of what we do. So we would support, if, for example, the child is not attending school, then depending on the specific case for the child and specific case for the family, we would support the family and the child so that he can access school. And then one thing that we do as part of our social programs that we're going to cover a bit later in the session is we track these children attendance to school so that we can ensure that they do not go back to work. And if you want to add anything to what to the answer I provided, please feel free to do so, as you're very close to this work.
Sure. One of the key things, before really identifying issues is, at the broad level, at the policy level, which I think, sometimes is very important. Generally, we see that when companies, tell their exporters that, we don't want child labor in our supply chain, and that's, understood. But then if policy says that, okay, in case we do find child labor, there's not going to be a penalization. We're going to work with you to improve those, issues. And, we'll not cut ties with the exporter if we find an issue. That's where I think it begins. If your messaging is such that, it's collaborative and you intend to work with the exporters and with the supply chain partners to make long-term improvements, that's where it begins. And of course, when I feel when producers, believe that, in case there are issues found and their brands are going to support them in remediating and, there are going to be no business implications, then, it sets the stage for a continuous improvement. And that's where, at least from the work that I see on the ground, that really helps. And in the work that we do with GoodWeave, I mean, we work with our partner brands to, we begin at the policy level and we work in messaging that, when we find issues, our focus is really remediating and trying to see what systems we can create so that those issues are not repeated. And I think that's where you begin. And over a period of time, of course, you're able to set up systems, and then it's continuous progress towards ensuring that these issues are not repeated.
All right, we're gonna pause there and continue with the presentation. Please keep the questions going, and we are going to address as many as we can in the at the end of the session. So moving to the third component of our methodology, the inspections and monitoring, which is what we were talking about just a second ago. This is a training that GoodWeave has developed so that we can provide partner organizations and companies with the knowledge and skills to implement best practices in inspections and monitoring activities, both announced and especially unannounced, because we think this is really important to uncover child labor where it is occurring. During this training, we provide organizations with tools and knowledge to actively work to identify risk indicators for child labor within your own production and identify how you can properly plan and implement inspections which address these risk factors. You will also practice critical skills that our team has practiced for a very long time, such as interviewing techniques, ask questions that will reveal the truth around child labor practices in production units, etc. And this is very important, of course, especially moving from one tier, like the formal tier in a factory setting, to more informal tiers, as Vinti will tell us in a second. Before I hand it over to Vinti, I wanted to also focus on the fact that this is a module that is quite adaptable, as we understand that companies have different ways to conduct audits. Some may be conducting audits that don't go beyond the first tiers in their supply chains. Companies may be wanting to improve and hone their audit skills, specifically around child labor detection. And we've also adapted this training to support companies that don't audit or inspect themselves. In this training, we would support you to look at the country context and legal framework for child labor and child work. These two things are very different. Sometimes it's not so easy to tell the difference. So we sort of support you understanding how to look at child labor versus light work within country's legal framework, as well as the different nuances that pose challenges at the various levels of the supply chains when you begin to inspect specifically and especially beyond the factory walls. And so to the point I mentioned before, Vinti will share a couple of, I'd say, top tips for inspection and monitoring at different levels of the supply chain.
A few key learnings from our 25 years of experience is that audit approach should definitely differ at the various levels of supply chains. We choose our teams and we train them extensively in people management skills, along with the technical know-how of auditing. To give you an example, An audit approach at a factory would require looking at documents and records as proof and interviewing workers and management. However, at the home-based level, it requires more trust building and conversation-led friendly approach. All our audits and inspections are random, frequent, and unannounced. However, at the home worker level, we ensure that we take the subcontractor along the first time we visit a household. This is to ensure that we are introduced to the home workers and permissions are sought before we enter someone's home. During this first visit, we explain our purpose, process, and intention for returning the next time unannounced. This helps a long way in building trust and gaining access at home sites in the future. Interviewing workers in the language and dialect they speak and having women inspectors conduct household inspections are some approaches we find extremely useful. Scheduling time of inspections at informal tiers also plays a key role to be able to identify children working during school hours or outside. Our teams are also trained to manage conflicts and handle sensitivities when they identify children working or resistance from suppliers or subcontractors, as they really focus on remediation and long-term improvements. So these are some of the key tips that we use in how we schedule audits and how we manage issues that crop up in the field, and this has really helped us kind of navigate our way through inspections in the informal tiers. I'll now hand over to Elisabeth for the next section.
Thanks, Vinti. So the next module that we have in the GoodWeave training series is on the remediation of child labor. So we've talked a little bit about this already. In this module, we discuss the different circumstances where we may find child labor in the supply chains, the guiding principles and frameworks for remediation that we should operate within, the international and national legal frameworks, and then the steps to take when child labor is identified, including working with partners. By the end of the training, a participant will walk away with strategies for how to implement this in their own supply chain and the practical processes and procedures to follow. In this module, together with participants, we look at appropriate remediation processes and we plan how to effectively safeguard children. We emphasize that while acting swiftly is crucial, especially when we're talking about child labor or other serious labor rights violations, a long-term corrective plan must be put in place to prevent reoccurrence and to protect victims. We also emphasize that the brand issuing the order should always try to work with the supplier where a violation is found to create a remediation plan and to monitor the process. Walking away from the supplier when issues are uncovered is not a solution, as Vinti had said earlier, and will likely only worsen conditions and issues. In most cases, it's easier to walk away from the problem, but ultimately you're not protecting the child by doing so. And this approach is about being committed to all actors in the supply chain and making long-term improvements. We also talk about immediate, short-term, and long-term actions in this module. What do you do? What don't you do? And when and how to bring in partners to provide support when and if it's needed. So prevention is the last module in our series. We have developed this to really bring out all of the different preventative measures that GoodWeave has developed over the years and share our own best practices from our system and help other organizations implement them in their own. It looks at the root causes of child labor. What are some of the direct and indirect preventative measures for child labor? How to effectively engage communities in addressing child labor, and how to integrate indirect measures into your own supply chains and way of working. Ultimately, we all want to end child labor. So we look together at case studies and examples of different preventative measures and how they were selected in GoodWeave supply chains. We'll work with participants on how to identify the best preventative measures based on the situation in their own supply chains, first identifying the root causes, and then looking at ways to address them. It's complex. There's a lot of detail that goes into this. It is all tailored to the different situation. There's a lot more to this module than we can go into here. So I'll leave it at that, and we'll have Vinti next provide you with some examples of how these programs in GoodWeave have worked and been initiated.
Some examples of educational programs we implement in India, Nepal, and Afghanistan are shown here on the screen. These are examples of direct and indirect ways that our methodology works to prevent child labor in various supply chains that we work in. We run education programs known as child-friendly communities in weaver and handworker villages. Communities are chosen in supply chains of participating brands and retailers and where risk of children engaging in work is high. Each household in these communities is surveyed to identify at-risk children between the ages of 6 and 14. Once identified, the program activities focus on addressing root cause of child labor and offer school admission and attendance follow-up to all at-risk children to ensure they do not fall in the trap of child labor. We also set up motivation and learning camps, which are run after school hours and work with the most vulnerable children to make them interested in learning through playway and activities, school and community engagement, parent-teacher meetings, setting up of education committees, rallies, quiz competitions, and other extracurricular activities are held to ensure community mobilization and sensitization. Every year, children are reassessed to understand whether the learning levels have improved. Our goal is that each child goes to school and demonstrates an age-appropriate learning level. Community engagement activities help create long-term impact. Along with this, we also run rights awareness, literacy classes for adolescents and women, and health and eye checkup camps for workers in communities and in supply chains. Newer activities to support the most marginalized workers, like enabling bank account opening and providing financial literacy awareness programs, are also being offered so that workers are able to access government aid and benefit from financial services schemes. I would now like to share a case story from our recent work in India. As I just mentioned, GoodWeave operates child labor prevention programs in India, and 12-year-old Muskan was found making bracelets alongside her mother Afsana during a surprise inspection. Her only schooling was 1 hour of daily Quran study at a local madrasa. Muskan's mother, Afsana, was keen to send Muskan to formal school to learn English, Hindi, and math, which would make her the first literate member of her family. Muskan's father, Shahir, was against the idea. Muskan has been beading bracelets, earrings, and necklaces since she was 9 years old. So GoodWeave's community-based facilitators worked with the madrasa to expand their curriculum, and with convincing from her mother, Muskan's father Shahir agreed to send her to an all-day school. With admission, books, and stationery support also provided by GoodWeave, Muskan began attending classes. In 5 months, Muskan had advanced rapidly towards her age-appropriate learning level. I spent time with Muskan in March during a visit we organized for our CEO, Nina Smith, to visit Muskan's village just before the international travel bans and lockdown. It took just a few minutes for Muskan to befriend us. We sat in the madrasa courtyard with a group of women and the school principal. It was a sweet, loving environment. Muskan gave us a quick tour of her school, and then we walked to her house. Her mother offered us a seat on the wooden cot and some tea, all while her hands never stopped beating as she chatted with us. GoodWeave helps companies see their full supply chains, which inevitably extend beyond factory walls down to homes. There are many layers, from community like Muskan's to the brokers who bring them piecework, subcontracted units and dedicated centers, the export manufacturers who consolidate orders for the international brands, and the retailers and consumers. Together, these actors have direct impact on the world's 152 million child laborers. And as Muskan's story demonstrates, joint efforts can result in improvements that positively affect children's lives. Before we said goodbye to Muskan during that March visit, Nina asked Muskan who she imagined wore the little bracelets she had created. Movie stars, she replied with pride. I'll now hand over to Elisabeth for the next section on best practices.
Thank you, Vinti. To date, GoodWeave has had several opportunities to apply our methodology alongside partners in other sectors and countries beyond our core work. We'd like to now share a few of those examples with you as we wrap up. Over the past nearly 7 years, GoodWeave has played a critical role in transforming the Nepali brick industry through Better Brick Nepal program. In this program, we developed a rigorous standard based on the GoodWeave International Standard that was tailored to the specific needs of the brick industry. Brick workers are among the most exploited and marginalized laborers in Nepal, with a workforce of nearly 200,000 people that includes an estimated 32,000 children. These vulnerable workers are often bonded by debt and subject to harsh living and working conditions. In response to this, the BBN program was launched, representing an opportunity for GoodWeave to team up with local and international experts and replicate its proven model in another industry. Together with our partner, the Global Fairness Initiative, and funded by Humanity United, we have seen immense change in attitude and practices on brick kilns. Where we were once not sure that transformation was possible, there are now 11 brick kilns out of 40 participating kilns certified against the BBN standard. Brick kiln owners understand that compliance with the standard also brings them in compliance with the Nepal labor law. And we have validation that change is possible in the brick industry. In the tea industry, GoodWeave has also had the opportunity to test the transferability of our system through a partnership with the Rainforest Alliance. In that project, the aim was to build the Rainforest Alliance's capacity to detect and remediate child labor, specifically in the tea sector in Assam. We worked in 2 tea communities where over 4,500 workers and 1,400 children lived and worked. We first assessed the risks for child labor, set up bridge schools to support them, and implemented awareness raising and child protection programs. We developed customized audit checklists for the sector and trained 5 certification bodies on child labor risk and detecting. We created and implemented child labor remediation protocols specific to the tea sector, which the Rainforest Alliance has subsequently used as a model in other agricultural sectors. Finally, to secure the impact that we achieved, we received commitment from the tea estate management that they would contribute financial resources to continue the learning centers and child protection committee activities. Now we'll hear a little from Silvia about our Mera work in Bangladesh.
Thanks, Elisabeth. And I think this is also a very appropriate example for the audience today. And it talks about our most recent project that we launched in Bangladesh as of this August in partnership with Awaj Foundation, Humanity United, BF Corporation, Monsoon Accessorize, and Mock McDonald, and with funding from UK aid from the UK government. The objective of this project is to have more brands and suppliers working together to reduce risk of child force and bonded labor in supply chains in Bangladesh. And we are working with these partners to achieve traceability and visibility of selected supply chains, remediate cases of child force and bonded labor, as well as share recommendations and on solutions to root causes. But the interesting sort of capacity building element of this project is that we are not implementing this project directly, but we are piloting the training modules we've been talking about in this session, transferring our best practices in deep supply chain due diligence to our partner organization, Awaj in this case, so that they can go out and conduct these inspections in supply chains and apply all the knowledge and tools that we've been refining for over 2 decades. So this is an example of how we train another organization and how can we sort of expand our work in different markets and sectors that way. We have, as Elisabeth mentioned, there is of course a lot more to say on each of the 5 components we very briefly touched in the session today. And we have worked and developed detailed modules on each of them. So through these 3 examples here, you can see when you apply these modules, what type of results, what type of initiatives, what type of work can be implemented. And we hope that after today's session, we raise your interest in learning more, of course, about this specific training on our methodology. Before we dedicate the remainder of the session to questions, quickly, a 2 minutes last poll. What has changed from about 70 minutes ago? What have you learned in this session? What is your main takeaway from this session? We would like to hear from you, and you can access the same paulev.com/GoodWeave page and let us know with maybe a short sentence or a few keywords. What is your main takeaway from the session today? number of outsourced production units. Yeah. This is something that usually surprises the brands we work with, sometimes even the suppliers, the exporters, the tier 1 suppliers that have no idea how vast and complex the networks of outsourced production units can be in their supply chains. Putting child labor back on the agenda, absolutely. We know it's an important requirement also within the German Partnership for Sustainable Textiles. So we are definitely happy to talk more about this issue today and to see this takeaway on the screen now. Remediation is critical, absolutely, it is. And as we say, the inspection part, right, the identification of the issue is where the work begins. It's not where the work ends. You end the work when you know that the child has been provided with remediation, and trying to identify hidden parts in the supply chains, which is where the most risk lies. Any next 5 seconds? See if anything else pops up on the screen. All right, thanks. Thank you for submitting your answers and participating to this last poll. It's great for us as well at GoodWeave to understand again what the message really from the session was, what you will be bringing home. Probably you're home already, but what you will be bringing home after the session today. Right, let's dedicate the next 10 minutes or so to questions. Do we have any in the pipeline for us, Madison? And go through them and address them one by one.
Yeah, so the first question, Silvia, is, can you explain a bit more about your approach to remediation?
Elisabeth, would you like to take that?
Sure. Hi, sorry, just trying to get on screen so that you can all see who's talking to you today. I think Vinti and Silvia already gave you a pretty good overview of how we work in the supply chains with remediation. But to add on to that, you know, we're partners with the brands that we work with, and we make sure that no child is removed from a supply chain without having followed up. That is critical to the way GoodWeave works and ensures, as Vinti described quite in detail about the programs that we have, that they're enrolled in school, that they are cared for, that they're either back with their parents. You know, we describe that there's different kinds of child labor situations that you're going to see in different supply chains, and we make sure that our responses are always tailored to those different kinds of situations.
Thanks, Elisabeth. The next question, perhaps Silvia and Vinti, you can both take this. It says suppliers must be resistant to disclosed information, as noted in Vinti's story earlier. So how does GoodWeave overcome this resistance?
Sure,
Yeah.
and correct. So that's you know, when I was presenting that example, and even now when I'm saying, this is something that we face on a regular basis. And you know, in one of the times when I was explaining, I also said it's long-term commitment and it's long-term work. Like I said, when you work with partners and you talk about remediation and really having policies which kind of ensure that there is a scope for improvement and long-term work and collaboration, we generally see during the first time we generally see information is not shared. But then when we go back and we share reports and say information was not, available to us, and that is why, there could be issues that are not addressed, and we work with the brands to, work with the suppliers. We generally see the second time or the third time, there is more acceptance to the auditing approach. And when the suppliers see that, our focus is really remediation, and our approach is really in the interest of the issues that we're finding and trying to see how we can find best solutions, we see acceptance, and we see more access that our team gets. So it is long term. We face resistance the first time, but over a period of time, and through our preventive approaches and through our collaborative work, we do find acceptance and commitment from exporters and producers. In fact, over a period of time, we see that all of them really talk and give great examples of the work that we do with them. So long term, short term, we definitely face resistance, but I think if your approach is positive and in the interest of the supply chains and the workers and the children, I think everyone takes part and moves in the positive direction.
To add a bit from the brand engagement perspective, as we said earlier in the session, it really helps when there is a policy already that allows subcontracting. In some cases, we work with brands that, because of their specific product categories, allow specifically home-based work and want to protect home-based work. The end goal is really to make informal work not a taboo, not something that companies want to hide and say, oh, we don't have this, because they know of the many problems that they could find. It's really provide them with a solution that can identify where this work happens and can tell them, look, there is no issue with this work, or look, there were some concerns and we're working with the producers to address these concerns. And I think going with this approach really helps also the producers seeing our work not as duplicative of the many audits that they're probably already undergoing at Tier 1, but something that adds value. And very importantly, adds value to the community, because at the end of the day, we want to empower these workers. We want to be there to support them, but they're people with their own ambitions and dreams. And what we try to do through these programs is to also enhance their resilience, so that they're not again and always the most vulnerable within the entire supply chain.
Thanks, Silvia. I don't know, Silvia, if you want to take the next question as well, but someone has asked in the questions about GoodWeave's focus on the carpet sector. So why has GoodWeave focused on the carpet sector?
Yeah, it's been a work, again, it's also related to the prevalence of child work and informal work in this sector. Carpets are very different in terms of products from apparel, which is which is the other sector where we focus on intensely. We have been working in the weaving communities for over 2 decades, and that's where there was a real need for this type of work and this type of intervention. And this is also why we have been expanding in Nepal, and we had a program in Afghanistan. We need to start somewhere, right? And in the carpet sector, there is really not a solution. There are not so many programs that address this type of issues. So when we started over 2 decades ago, this was really, as I said, a pioneering solution and one of a kind type of intervention. And we've been creating this label, right? That has been a trademark for the organization, for GoodWeave. You can see this label on products around the world, and we have created a system that really links all the players in the supply chains, the importer that signs up as a licensee, the suppliers that also has to sign up as a licensee and has to allow the inspections that have a result if compliance is achieved, the label, all the way to the consumers, and also, of course, covering the communities that receives the positive impact of the work that we do. So it's been really, in this little label you can find of products, is really, I would say, the summary of this work that involves all the stakeholders in the supply chains. And it's been an area where we had been able to refine what we do for so long. And if we're talking today about transferring knowledge and tools to other sectors and other organizations, is because we have done so much work and have learned so much in the carpet sector that we are, confident we can now expand and train others to understand how we have done what we've done in the carpet sector. Elisabeth, did you want to add anything?
No, I think you covered it. It's really the heart of where we started. It's really our history. It's our roots, is working in the carpet sector. So, and from there, we're able to expand because we have learned what we've learned in working in communities and deep in the supply chain. Madison, do we have any other questions? We're just about at time. We have about 2 more minutes.
We don't have any other questions right now. So Silvia, I'll transition over to your last slide.
Sure, thanks. And it's going to be a quick slide. We are very glad that you all joined us today. I will repeat myself and say that there is a lot more than we could cover in these 75 minutes, but we hope to have given you a good overview of the work that we do and all the different components of this system that we are ready to share with more partners going forward. So if you're interested, if you have any additional questions we couldn't address, so you think about, after the session ends, please feel free to get in touch at silvia@goodweave.org. And you can also find us at goodweave.org as our website that has information on several of the topics that we talked about today. Thank you to my colleagues for their insight, to Madison, and for, of course, the German Partnership on Sustainable Textile for the opportunity. And I wish you a fantastic rest of your day or evening. Thanks all.